This is Unit 4, Level 3, Adding and Subtracting Mixed Numbers. So in order to add and subtract mixed numbers, it's really like adding whole numbers and then also adding the fractions, which we have done both parts. So if we think back to just the last lesson when we were adding and subtracting fractions, the first thing we had to do was find a common denominator, and we looked for the common denominator by finding the LCM, the least common multiple. So I'm going to take my denominators of 4 and 2 and see if I can find the least common multiple. I picked numbers hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier to spot as we start on our mixed numbers, but when I take my multiples of 2, I have 2, 4, 6, and of course 4 starts with 4, and already I have found a common denominator. So 4 is the least common multiple. So I'm going to go ahead and change these fractions into fourths. What I notice is this top is already in fourths, so all I'm going to do is multiply by 1. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do the top, so the top will be 3. When I come to this bottom one, how do I get from 2 to 4? Well, I'm multiplying by 2. Whatever I do to the bottom, I also have to do the top, so 1 times 2 is 2. So I now have common denominators, and I'm now able to add. When we add fractions, the first thing that we do is after we find the least common multiple and have created those equivalent fractions, the next thing that we do is add the numerators. So I'm going to take the numerator 3, and I'm going to add it to the numerator 2, and I'm going to get a new numerator of 5. Of course, as always, our denominator is going to stay the same, so it's going to stay 4. And I have now added the fraction part of my mixed number. All that's left to do is add the whole number part. So I have 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. We have now added the mixed numbers together. However, one thing that we have to be careful of, and what you'll notice with my answer right here, is that I ended up with a mixed number that has an improper fraction. I can't keep it that way. In order to simplify it, I have to change that improper fraction to a mixed number. So I'm going to think of this particular problem as 2 plus 5 fourths. So I'm going to change 5 fourths into a mixed number and then add that 2 to it. Well, if you'll remember back to the first unit, or the first level, of this unit, in order to change 5 fourths, I would take 5 and I would divide it by 4. 5, and I would divide it by 4. 4 goes into 5 one time. 1 times 4 is 4. I subtract, and I'm left with a remainder of 1. Now, if you remember back, this answer, our quotient, becomes our whole number. The remainder becomes our numerator, and we put it back over the same denominator. So 5 fourths is equal to 1 and 1 fourth. When I add the whole number back to it, 2 plus 1 is going to give me 3. 3 and 1 fourth. This is adding and subtracting mixed numbers. Now, if at the end of this problem, back when I was up here, if I had ended up with a proper fraction, not an improper fraction where the numerator is bigger than the denominator, I would look to see if I could simplify it just as I was simplifying with adding and subtracting numbers. I always want to check to see if it's improper first. If it's not, then I want to see if there's any number that will divide into both the numerator and denominator. Next up, what happens when we subtract? Well, when we subtract, the beginning is the same. I still need to find a least common multiple so I can create a common denominator. I have 4 and 3 as my denominators, so those are the two that I want to check for the least common multiple in order to find a common denominator. So 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times 4 is 12. There we go. I have found a least common multiple and therefore can create a common denominator of 12. Again, in order to create that common denominator, I'm going to go ahead and see what am I doing to get from 4 to 12? Well, 4 times 3 will give me 12. Whatever I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top to keep it equivalent. so the top will be 3. So 1/4 is equal to 3/12. On the bottom here, I have going from 3 to 12, I would multiply by 4. So I'm going to do the same thing to the top. 2 times 4 is 8. Now that I've created a common denominator, I'm ready to subtract, but I notice that I have a problem. My top number here is 3/12, and my bottom number is 8/12. If I think to myself, can I take 3 and subtract 8? I know I can't. So in this case, just like I would with whole numbers, I have to borrow. But I need to stop myself and think about what I'm actually borrowing. I'm borrowing 1 whole. I just borrowed it right here. That 1 whole that I just borrowed from right here is actually broken into 12ths. And so when I look at that 1 whole, how many 12ths is equal to 1 whole? Well, we know when the numerator and the denominator are equal, our fraction is going to be equal to 1. So I'm not borrowing 10. I can't say that I'm borrowing 10 and add it to the 3 and make 13. Instead, I need to say I'm borrowing 12. I'm borrowing 12 twelfths because that's what 1 whole is equal to when my denominator is 12. So once I add those 12 twelfths to the 3 twelfths I already have, 12 plus 3 is going to be 15. So I'll have 15 twelfths. Now I can subtract because 15 minus 8 is 7. My denominator will still stay the same. And now when I subtract my whole numbers, I need to go from what I ended with, which is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. I'll then go ahead and look for the greatest common factor of my numerator and my denominator to see if I can simplify this fraction. So 7, the two factors for 7 are 1 and 7. For 12, it's going to be 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Besides 1, I don't see another factor that they have in common. So this cannot be reduced. 1 and 7/12 is simplified. So I'm left with 1 and 7/12. Now, another option, if you don't want to worry about borrowing, let's take this problem again. 3 and 1/4. Let me go back. 1 and 2/3. Another option before I even start is to change this into an improper fraction and then subtract an improper fraction minus an improper fraction. So to do that, I would take my whole number times my denominator, which is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And I would add my numerator. Plus 1 would be 13. And I would get 13/4. And I would do the same to the bottom. 1 times 3 is 3. Plus 2 is 5. And this would equal 5/3. Because again, my denominator is going to stay the same. Now, I still have a problem that I need to find a common denominator for. I already did that work on the prior page when I was finding the least common multiple of 4 and 3, and I know it's 12. I can again look to see what I'm doing on the bottom. To get from 3 to 12, I'm multiplying by 4, so I would need to do the same to the top. The top would be 20. Again, at the top, to get to 12, I'm multiplying by 3, so I would multiply the top by 3. 13 times 3 is 39. When I finish, I'm ready to subtract. 39, again, just the numerator, minus 20 is going to give me 19. My denominator is going to stay the same. It's 12. I now have 19 twelfths. In order to simplify it, I need to change my improper fraction, that's when the numerator is bigger than the denominator, into a mixed number. To do that, I would take 19 and divide by 12. 12 goes into 19 one time. When I subtract, I'm left with a remainder of 7. Again, your quotient is your whole number. Remainder is your numerator. and your denominator is going to stay the same. So again, I got 1 and 7/12. So you can either look at it as in terms of borrowing, which it's harder to think about it in terms of borrowing. However, your numbers stay smaller, so they're a little easier to work with. Or you can add the extra step of changing them into improper fractions, which tends to be a little bit easier when you go to subtract. You don't have to worry about the borrowing. However, your numbers get a little bit larger, so you'll need to work with those numbers that are a little bit larger. Either way, we end up with that same answer of 1 and 7/12. Again, this only happens when you cannot subtract because the numerator on top is smaller than the numerator that's below it. So again, this is Unit 4, Level 3, adding and subtracting mixed numbers.